Hey guys, Paul here. So, it's no secret that I love playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But what you probably didn't know is that I really love the experience of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And watching Yu-Gi-Oh! I like the emotions, I like the spectacle, and over the years I've noticed that there are certain cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That just elicit a very powerful response from both of the players involved, from anybody who's watching the game.
Oh, entered battle phase.
Wow. And the battle phase evenly matched.
These cards that, when they hit the field, you know that something is about to change. It's just palpable. This is sort of like the, equivalent of a Mirror Force getting activated, or a Torrential Tribute, or Gore's the Emissary of Darkness, if you remember that era of Yu-Gi-Oh! They're not necessarily just combo starters, or even necessarily boss monsters, but just cards that kind of turn the tide, make for a dramatic finish. Those sorts of things really get me going in duels. And so I have devised a list of the top 10, what we'll call the most dramatic Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards in the game. Whether you love them or you hate them, when they get played, you know it's going to hurt. So card number 10 is Super Polymerization. Now this is an oldie but a goodie. It's from the GX era. It's a quick play spell where you discard a card and you get to conduct a fusion summon using monsters from both players' side of the field. This means that you can use it to get rid of opponents' monsters that might be causing you a lot of trouble by just fusing them away into your own fusion monster. So it's a really big shift in card advantage and a way of getting rid of existing threats, but it goes up a notch when you remember that Super Polymerization can't actually be responded to with anything. So even though there are lots of boss monsters that can negate cards, and you can even use a Solemn Judgment on this sort of thing, Super Poly ignores all that. Your opponent can't do anything when Super Poly gets activated, and so for that reason, it makes a real difference, and both players feel it when this card gets activated. Typically, you'll be using Super Polymerization to fuse away dark monsters to make something like Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom, or maybe you can make something like Mud Dragon of the Swamp. But depending on the deck that you're playing, there are actually other options that come up too. And I really do love that Super Polymerization has kind of become this powerful, like, anti-meta card in some cases. When the format has too many dark monsters, it gets really strong. But nowadays, thanks to cards like Garura, it's just extremely versatile and can hit a lot of different matchups. So that's why it's my number 10, because when Super Poly hits the field, your opponent kind of feels a little bit of helplessness, a little bit of despair as they know that they're going to lose their two cards to this thing. All right, number 9 is Triple Tactics Talent. So this is a really infamous normal spell card. If your opponents use any monster effect in the main phase of the current turn, you can activate Triple Tactics Talent and you get to pick one of 3 powerful effects, each of which is actually based on a banned or previously banned card. So you can either draw 2 cards from your deck, you can take control of one of your opponent's monsters until the end of the turn, or you can look at your opponent's hand and shuffle 1 card in it back into their deck. So this is huge for a number of reasons. Obviously, hand traps are really prevalent in Yu-Gi-Oh! Almost every deck is going to be running some variation of Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler, Infinite Impermanence. And so most hand traps are actually monster cards, which means that if your opponent tried to interrupt your turn with a hand trap like Ash Blossom, you can then activate Triple Tactics Talent, and now you get an array of powerful effects. And it kind of makes your opponent freeze a little bit, because you're sort of punishing them for trying to stop your plays. Triple Tactics is obviously a very powerful card for that reason. Drawing 2 cards means that you could extend your combo and keep your turn going, or taking control of one of their monsters makes it really good when you're going second, because you can kind of take control of whatever the strongest thing they have on the field is and make some sort of reversal play with that. It gets better when you consider that this effect doesn't target, so you can actually steal any monster from your opponent, and even if they try to get things off the field or shift stuff around, you are going to be taking something when this card resolves. And the final effect is, in my opinion, the most vicious, because getting to look at your opponent's hand and pull a card out of it and put it back into their deck is extremely, extremely debilitating, especially if you're the person going first and you activate Triple Tactics Talent after getting hand trapped by your opponent. You could put back one of their combo starter cards. You could see if they have something like Nibiru in their hand, put it back if you need to. There's so many things that you can do with Triple Tactics Talent, and it does a great job of wrapping up a lot of iconic ban cards like Pot of Greed and Change of Heart and Confiscation all into one card. So I really like the design. Don't like losing to it though, that kind of sucks. Okay, number 8 is actually a 2-way tie between Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplet. So these cards are really strong because they basically are both ways of shutting down an opponent's board so that you can play the game. Dark Ruler No More lets you negate all your opponent's current monsters on the field, but you won't be able to deal any damage that turn. And then Forbidden Droplet lets you negate monsters' effects and have their attack points, but you have to send cards from your hand or field to the graveyard to use it. In exchange though, it is a quick play spell, so it's a little bit more versatile, and you do still get to deal damage that turn. So both of these effects are really good because so much of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is predicated on going first, making a board of monsters that can negate stuff and disrupt your opponent's plays, and it can be really tough to play against that. But when somebody activates Dark Ruler No More, it's kind of like, turning the opponent's field off in just this one huge thrust. And now you get to start playing the game for yourself, and your opponent is largely helpless to stop you. Now, as the game has evolved since these cards, there are obviously going to be times when your opponent maybe has spell and trap cards set that they can use, and they can also still play like monsters and stuff from their hand. But the fact that you can turn off these, just really strong omni-negating boss monsters that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so infamous for, make these cards real game changers, because it's like, okay, you're forcing your opponent to let you play the game, which, God, that sounds awful when I put it that way, but I really do love when these cards resolve. Forbidden Droplet in particular is really versatile because you can chain it to things, so maybe if your opponent tries to negate one of your cards, like a spell that you played, you could use Forbidden Droplet and then send that spell as part of the cost, and then maybe some monster from your hand or field that's already used its effect. And what's cool about Forbidden Droplet is actually that your opponent can't respond with the types of cards that you sent to activate it, whereas Dark Ruler No More just says that they can't respond with monster effects. So there is a little bit of a difference between these two cards, but they largely accomplish the same thing, so I just thought that they're one and one, and I just put them in the same spot on the list. Alright, card number 6 is Red Reboot, an absolutely vicious, infamous trap card. It's extremely powerful. So it's a counter trap that negates one of your opponent's trap cards, but it flips it back face down, and then lets them set another trap card from their deck if they choose to. Now, this alone is a little bit weird, right? Like, you're negating the trap, but it's not even getting destroyed, like they could use it again next turn. And you're even letting them get another trap card in the process, which seems like, okay, geez, you're really helping them out. But it changes a little bit when you consider that Red Reboot has another stipulation. A, you can activate it from your hand by paying half your life points. Even though it's a counter trap card and those normally have to be set, this gives it a load of versatility because it means that even if you're going second and your opponent set a bunch of trap cards, you can still use Red Reboot as a spell speed 3 card from your hand. But the real kicker is that after Red Reboot resolves, your opponent can't use any more trap cards for the entire turn. So imagine this, right? Your opponent is playing a very trap-based deck. They've got 3 or 4 trap cards set, and you start trying to play, they negate your first monster, or they try to do something to its effect, and you activate Red Reboot straight from your hand, force that card face down. Even though they get another trap card, it doesn't matter because they can now not use any more traps for the rest of the turn. No matter the spell speed, no matter what they do, your opponent just can't activate traps. So now you get to play completely like just unimpeded. It's extremely strong for OTK decks, just any deck that can put out a lot of damage and has to go second. Red Reboot is insanely good for it. And also, after using Red Reboot, you can safely use a card like Harpy's Feather Duster to just destroy all your opponent's spell and trap cards because they won't be able to respond with any of their traps. However, one thing that I like about Red Reboot is that as sacky and overly powerful as it can feel like, if for some reason you don't finish your opponent off in the turn that you use Red Reboot, they now have their original trap set again, a new trap that they got to set from their deck, and yeah, like it's all just going to be coming at you. So there is a small bit of risk and reward involved with this card, and I do think that that adds a little bit more to the tension and the drama of using it. Because when Red Reboot happens, you're just going to kind of reel back in your seat because it's like, oh yeah, I'm probably finished. But if they don't finish the job, then the duel's probably turning around again from there. And so that's why I think that Red Reboot really fulfills, it really fills its niche extremely well. And despite being overly powerful and probably having good cause to be banned, at least in the TCG, it's a pretty cool design for a card. All right, moving into the top 5 of this list, we've actually got our first monster card, Divine Arsenal AA-ZEUS, Sky Thunder. This is a rank 12 Xyz monster, but you won't really ever be summoning it with 2 level 12s. You can overlay it on top of any other Xyz monster during a turn that an Xyz monster attacked. So basically what this means is that as long as you can attack with any Xyz monster at all, then in your main phase 2, you can overlay Divine Arsenal Zeus on top of it. And so there are a lot of different ways of kind of fulfilling this. Things like Zodiac Borbo or certain other monsters that can like attack your opponent and just can't be destroyed by battle can be used. And then in your main phase 2, you could overlay something like Downward Magician to get an extra material, and then finally put AA-ZEUS on top of it. Now Zeus has an extremely powerful effect. you can detach 2 materials from it and send all other cards on the field to the graveyard as a quick effect. This is extremely strong because it means that you can just clear the board whenever your opponent wants to try to make any sort of a comeback play. You just wipe everything off the field clean. It doesn't destroy the cards, it actually sends them to the graveyard, which makes it really good for sort of dodging certain monsters that like can't be destroyed or get effects when they are destroyed. But it gets even better because Zeus can actually use its effect multiple times in the same chain. So normally, if you were to use Zeus and try to wipe the board clean, your opponent might activate some sort of a thing in response. Maybe it's an infinite impermanence or something else to like negate its effect, or maybe they just try to like pull some sort of a way to get more cards on the field or something like that. Doesn't matter, because as long as you have the materials for it, you can detach 2 more materials in that same chain and use Zeus's effect again to re-wipe the field. It's really strong. I love this thing because while it's not necessarily a game ender in itself, since you're obviously going to be in main phase 2 when you make it, it still sort of puts the game on a bit of a clock because Zeus is sort of ensuring that your opponent is going to be really hard pressed to make a comeback in their next turn. So Zeus can be used really offensively, it can be used really defensively, and I feel like any time that it hits the board, you just kind of feel like something's definitely changed there. All right, number 4 on the list is Underworld, Goddess of the Closed World, a Link 5 monster that's actually really cool. So the way that you make it is by using 4+ effect monsters, so you're gonna have to use a lot of your stuff, but here's the trick. You can actually use 1 monster that your opponent controls as the material for this card, and that alone makes a huge difference, because it means that you can actually use your opponent's Link 2 monsters to be 2 of the materials for this, or more importantly, just any of their powerful boss monsters can be used as Link material. And what I like about this is that there is a bit of a commitment involved. You have to use a lot of your own monsters in order to just get like 1 of the opponent's monsters. So you do have to make it count. But the big benefit here is that when you link away an opponent's monster, none of this starts a chain. So monsters that are like unaffected by monster effects or can't be targeted or have some sort of a negation that you have to worry about, you get to just completely skip all of that. You could use that with something like a Baronne de Fleur, Borlode Savage Dragon, Apollosa. Those are legal in Master Duel, not right now in the TCG. But really any just kind of towers-like card that is well protected and just a nuisance to get off the field, as long as you can field enough monsters to make Underworld Goddess, you can take it away from your opponent. And this is huge. It makes it like a sort of kaiju that anybody can access from their extra deck. And I really like that. In addition, when Underworld Goddess hits the field, it makes a really big impact in general. It can automatically negate everything on your opponent's field, like all of their monsters, and get their effects negated. It can negate things that summon cards back from the graveyard. And Underworld Goddess is unaffected by any effects that don't specifically target her. So she's actually really tough. Like if your opponent has a field of multiple monsters that have some sort of negates and disruptions and things like that, you can take the strongest monster away to make Underworld Goddess, then Underworld Goddess shows up and tries to negate everything else. And it's actually pretty tough to deal with her because most Omni negates don't target, and so that actually means that they can't like negate her effect to negate everything else. So when Underworld Goddess gets summoned, the entire board state changes, and it's usually the key to making a really big comeback. But I like that it is balanced by the fact that you do have to get enough monsters on your own side of the field to take your opponent by surprise with this. She very much earns that sort of title that the community has given her of the white woman jump scare because she just appears out of nowhere. But I really do like this card, and I think it's very well designed. Card number 3 is Evenly Matched. This is a trap card that has another one of those kind of weird designs where it can be activated from the hand. But basically, you activate Evenly Matched at the end of the battle phase. And when it resolves, your opponent has to banish cards they control face down until they control the same amount of cards as you. And here's the kicker. You can actually activate Evenly Matched from your hand if you don't control any cards on your field. So there are a lot of different applications of this. You could set Evenly Matched face down and have your opponent attack you with a bunch of things, and then you can activate it. Or if you're going second and your opponent made a big board of monsters that do a whole bunch of stuff, they've got maybe a lot of spells and traps set, you can actually start your turn, skip straight to your battle phase without summoning anything, because you don't have to have a monster on the field to do your battle phase. And then at the end of the battle phase, you activate Evenly Matched, and your opponent still just loses everything, or nearly everything. They'll get to keep 1 card because Evenly Matched is in the field, so they'll match the amount of cards you have, and so they get to have at least 1 card. But Still, there are several balancing mechanisms in place for evenly matched. The biggest one being that you have to make it through the battle phase. So if you're ever using this on an opponent's turn, like during their battle phase, there's always a threat that they could just have killed you outright. Because if you have no cards left in your hand and you're trying to or on your field and you're trying to use it from your hand, then that means you were obviously very vulnerable. And also if you're using it on your own turn, then it means that you're not gonna get a main phase 1 or a battle phase of like attacking the opponent. So you won't win that turn outright. Still though, evenly matched is just super duper strong for dealing with decks that run a lot of like face up or face down spell and trap cards. If they don't have a monster that can actually negate evenly matched, then it's extremely powerful in that way. And something that I like about evenly is just that the moment it gets played, there's such a gasp because now it's on your opponent to like pick, oh God, what cards do they want to keep on their field because they're only going to keep one, or sometimes they might be in a situation where they get to keep like 2 or 3 or something. But still, just that decision making can be extremely scary because they're having to banish those cards face down, so they'll never really feasibly be able to access them again. And evenly matched can even get around monsters that aren't affected by trap cards because it makes your opponent just banish the cards face down. It doesn't actually do it with the traps effect, which is like a weird sort of ruling thing. But yeah, all in all, I love the tension and the response that kind of happens when evenly matched of all cards gets activated. So definitely earns the number 3 spot. Card number 2 on the list is Accesscode Talker, a very infamous Link 4 monster that is great for finishing games in dramatic fashion. So when it gets summoned to the field, it has 2 different effects. You target a Link monster in your graveyard and it gains attack points equal to that monster's Link rating times 1,000. So normally Accesscode Talker only has 2,300 attack, but if you were to target a Link 3 monster, then he'll gain 3,000 attack and now he's at 5,300, easily swinging over pretty much any common threat that you're going to find in the game. But it's got a second effect too. You can banish a Link monster from your graveyard and destroy a card in the field, and this effect doesn't target. All of this would make it a pretty strong boss on its own, but here's the real icing on the cake. You can't use cards in response to Accesscode Talker's effects. So your opponent can't just use something like Infinite Impermanence or one of their other sort of negates or disruptions to stop Accesscode Talker. Once it hits the board and starts popping stuff, you're pretty much just going to be finished from there. They're going to destroy all the threats in the field, anything that would get in the way of dealing enough damage to kill you, and that's usually the duel. Now, that isn't to say that Accesscode Talker is unstoppable, right? Like, you know, there are certain cards that just can't be destroyed by card effects. There is a small window of opportunity after it's gained its attack points that you can use something like Infinite Impermanence. But generally speaking, when Accesscode Talker hits, the duel is ending right then and there. And I love cards like that, where it's just like, okay, when this gets summoned, we're ending the game right now. And the final card on the list, card number 1, you probably guessed it by now, is Nibiru, the Primal Being. This is an absolutely infamous Yu-Gi-Oh card with, in my opinion, a great design. It's very powerful. So with Nibiru, if your opponent has summoned 5 or more times in a turn, you can activate Nibiru from your hand. When Nibiru activates, what it does is it tributes all the monsters in the field, your monsters and your opponents, and then summons a token to your opponent's side of the field and summons Nibiru to your side of the field. And the token has attack and defense points equal to everything that was used to summon it, everything that got tributed off the field. So Nibiru is effectively a check against decks that spam out a lot of special summons, which is many decks in Yu-Gi-Oh right now. But I like the way that it creates this sort of game of chicken between both decks. Because ever since Nibiru's release, it's now pertinent that a deck be able to find some sort of a way to get an Omni Negate or some sort of a monster effect negation onto the field by their 5th summon. If they can summon something like that, Baronne de Fleur, Apollosa, those are now banned in the TCG, but they're still around in Master Duel. If they can get one of those onto the field by their 5th summon, then they're usually good because they can just stop Nibiru. But if they don't do that, then Nibiru is just lying in wait, waiting for you to commit a lot to the board and then wipe it all away. And I think that anytime I've seen Nibiru activated in, you know, a World's Finals match or like some Master Duel tournament where people are spectating, it always, just without fail, gets just a reeling response from anybody watching, from the players involved, from the people who are just spectating the duel. I love Nibiru for this reason because it can just be so strong in that way, but it's not perfect. There are drawbacks to Nibiru. Obviously, like I said, if your opponent can get the negation out, they can stop it, but also the token that you give your opponent when you activate Nibiru can be extremely powerful. And most decks usually have a way of getting rid of the token, some sort of way to like bounce it, banish it, pop it, or whatever. But if you don't, the Nibiru token can be huge and it can actually kill you. And remember, you're giving that to your opponent to use. In addition to that though, some decks can just play through Nibiru. Even after they get their field wiped, there's like sort of a bit of a decision involved with the person who's got Nibiru, because they have to decide when's the best time to activate Nibiru. Like, do I want to get a little greedy, wait for my opponent to commit everything and then use it, but then I might be risking them getting an Omni Negate set up? And also, after Nibiru resolves, will they still have more things that they can do? Sometimes people will link off the Nibiru token and keep comboing, for Christ's sake. So yeah, Nibiru is by no means an instant win, but it is a very huge game-swinging card, and for that reason, I think it deserves #1 on the list of the most dramatic Yu-Gi-Oh cards to play. So yeah, that's my list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what I left out, because there are plenty of other really powerful cards, especially when you get on a like per deck basis. A lot of decks have their own cards that like, you know, are specific to them, but when they resolve, it just kind of swings the game a whole bunch. So yeah, there's plenty of others. I would love to hear what you guys' favorites are down below in the comments. But without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.